All right, how you doing? Welcome back to Pnoid News. All right, for any of y'all who came over from the Silver Report, I want to say, look here. All right, just because you respond to an individual's video does not mean you hate them. Believe it or not, I went to SD Bullion and bought silver. You know what I mean? Using his code. You know what I mean? Legitimately, like, I support the channel. I'm a big fan of what he does. But I do think that he is missing a bunch of information. And to stand here and look at things, all right, completely. And I want to address all the nonsense before we get started. Yes, I'm a smaller channel. It's mostly because I tell the truth. All right. I don't really just put blame on other people. I'm not interested in going, oh man, it's the big banks or it's the Jews or, you know what I mean, whoever. All right. And I think when you look at things as a whole and have full parts of information, all right, legit, when you have all of the information in front of you, it's a better way of looking at things. Okay. And I wanted to respond to the video that he made today about how the Fed's the problem. And he's partially right, but he's mostly wrong. All right. And the idea that the Fed is not the government is nonsense. All right. Like, the Fed is the government. All right. Get nothing misunderstood. The Fed is the government. The government is the Fed. They're the same people. All right. There's no real difference. The Fed is a magic trick to fool people into thinking that the United States doesn't own money. All right. It's legit. The Fed is the cucked husband of the American government. All right. Who's like, you know, I mean, the gold digging wife. And that's really on some honest stuff. And there's a lot of things that people don't know are going on right now, and I'd like to bring light to that as we go through this video. And we're gonna touch on a lot of stuff, from pension crises to 401k issues to baby boomers to social programs. And there's going to be a lot of information thrown at you that you might not already have. And if you look any of it up, you'll find out it's all ultimately true. I don't spit nonsense. I refuse to stand here and tell you any lies. I will not, and I shall not stand here and lie to you about anything. Okay. Like, you can check out anything I say. I have no problem backing up all my information with evidence. If, you know, my man from the Silver Report would like to come on my channel, yo, by all means, dude. Like, legit, the link is in the description for my Discord. Come on, we can have a conversation. I usually do my live streams tonight about 9 o'clock is usually what time I try to do them. I've been so busy. Legit, I've been so busy. Been working my butt off trying to, you know, I mean, earn money because, you know, the holidays kind of put me behind because I drive trucks. So, like, if my wheels ain't turning, I ain't earning. You know what I mean? Tends to be how it works. So, but in the meantime, let's get to this video real quick.
Hey guys, welcome to the Silver Report Uncut. I wanted to talk about a very important subject, and this comes out of a conversation I was having earlier. I was discussing about the Federal Reserve. You know, got this Bill Dudley coming out and saying that the Federal Reserve has no impact on equity prices. And honestly, I think our greatest obstacle right now, it happens to be ignorance of this exact, organization, the Federal Reserve. Number one, it is a private bank. It is not federal. It's not a federal bank. And, just the very thing, and, I say this often, but just the fact that they would name their bank the Federal Reserve in advance, the plan was to fool people into believing that it was a federal bank. Now, that's not the case. We used to use gold as money here in the United States. In 1913, $1 was worth almost $25. That's the equivalent right now. That's how much the dollar has lost in purchasing power.
Believe it or not, I think it's much higher than that. And let's address this Federal Reserve being a private bank. Okay, so the Federal Reserve basically funds the U.S. government. All right, it's how it operates. It stands here and it pumps money, or pumps fiat currency actually into, the markets to be able to continue to have equity prices rise. So stand here and say that, the Fed's money printing has nothing to do with equity prices, is patently ridiculous. I completely agree with him. What are you talking about? You can't devalue the currency and then not have an effect on the equity market. Yeah, you're absolutely correct about that. That's an absolute true fact. But when the Fed was created in 1913, the creature from Jekyll Island, all this type of stuff, they had actually gone through a whole bunch of downturns where like it was just complete instability in the market, and they wanted to be able to have a fiat currency that could be used nationwide that they could maintain a certain value is kind of how it worked, right? And it also allowed for the expansion of the money supply. And that's a really important thing, especially when you have more and more people being born and more things needing to be bought and more things put on credit. And that's not just like credit for, like your credit cards. I know what you're thinking. No, like credit for like funding businesses and credit to be able to open up, businesses and have houses and, and be able to stand here and borrow money to pay for stuff like the Dust Bowl or, financial reconstruction and wars and all the things that go with it. You need to be able to print money to be able to pay for all of this stuff. All right. And that's because you can't really like continue to raise taxes on individuals. All right. And that's something that, that's something that you really, a lot of people don't understand. Like back in 1913, you have to remember, like before the IRS and before any of the federal taxes came to really being, the only real taxes were property taxes and tariffs, right? And this is the reason why, like for the most part, before the 1860s, the only individuals who were allowed to vote were property owning white males, because those are the individuals who had any stake in our government. Right. And today, like everybody gets to vote. And when you don't have a stake in your government, when you're not paying the taxes, when you're not the one footing the bill, right, you probably shouldn't have a say in how government runs. Like when you really get down and dirty with it. And that's a whole nother part of this that, like nobody's even conversating about at all, is the fact that like they're not raising our taxes, right? Because they know that they can't raise our taxes because like, it would be highly unpopular to do so. But at the same point, they continue to print money, which causes inflation. This is kind of how it works, and allows the government to continue to borrow for future, future generations. And that's really where we're at today. So let's keep on going with this video, man.
You would also be surprised to find out that gold actually used to be $35 an ounce. There was a time when citizens couldn't even buy gold here in the United States. They had to turn over their gold to a Federal Reserve Bank.
Actually, after World War II, they had, oh man, I forget the name of it, but there was an actual agreement that the United States was the world reserve currency, right? And they sat here and they said that the United States had to maintain our currency at $35 per ounce, right? And at any given time, like this is after World War II, so like this is after everybody had to turn in their gold or whatever the case might be during FDR and the Great Depression and all the things that he passed, right? Which, when he said you had to turn it into a Federal Reserve, like that's because like the Federal Reserve legitimately needed the gold to be able to borrow again, so they can continue to print money to pay for all these social programs that they were putting in, right? With the Great Society Acts and all these things, and like these are all parts that like we're kind of leaving out of this video that I think should be discussed. You know what I'm saying? Like it's important to have a conversation about this in order to like to understand the whole history. Actually, my last video, I just broke all this down, right? And this system, where, man, I can't believe I can't remember the name of this system. Legit, that aggravates me to no end. Like, I'm sorry, I was working all night. I've been working since, I think like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I just got home and I had something to eat. I wanted to make a video about this, because I think it's important that we add all these parts into this. But yeah, like this whole system, right? There was an agreement that was done up in Connecticut, where they sat down and they, they hammered out there's going to be $35 an ounce, and the United States was going to be the world reserve currency. And there's remnants of it today, but it actually turned into what's known as the petrodollar status, right? That we still are rolling on today, and this is, again, more stuff that we're not discussing. All right. And it has very little to do with the Fed, other than the Fed being the operator of it when it really comes down to it. Like the government uses the Fed, right? And you go, oh, it's a private bank. Like, okay, it has private shareholders, right? But on the same point, it pays its dividends into the United States Treasury to be able to help fund the budget, right? And think about it like this. See, if you put it in a manner of where you go, all right, would you rather have the Federal Reserve run like the post office or your local DMV or Department of Transportation, whatever you have in your state? You know, I have a Department of Transportation here, right? Would you rather it be run like a government agency where there's like, you know, union employees who have no stake in the company whatsoever, you know what I mean, who don't get paid whether or not they do their job? Or would you rather have it, you know what I mean, our actual economy, you know what I mean, these type of things ran by people who, you know what I mean, have a stake in what happens, you know what I mean? They get bonuses for doing well and they get fired for doing a bad job. Like, I think that's a better system. So let's talk about it in a proper manner when it really comes down to it. I just, you know, I wanted to add that in real quick.
In exchange for fiat dollars. Since then, our currency has rapidly
the Bretton Woods Agreement. It was called the Bretton Woods Agreement, man. It just came to me. Like, I'm sorry. Let's keep going.
Appreciated. It's lost nearly all of its purchasing power. If you've been on this earth any amount of time, you'll very quickly realize this. And as we see, inflation is very rapidly, and the official inflation gauges, they're a joke, right? They've said there's been no inflation. Maybe they're not counting healthcare or rent or food or...
Okay, so like, yeah, I'm fully behind your ideology here. The CPI is complete nonsense, and I've been saying it for years, right? Unemployment numbers and the CPI is complete nonsense. Like, we've known this since the 2000s, all right? Like, when we started looking into this, you know, remember back Ron Paul, we were all part of the Tea Party back in the day? Like, look, you're probably right about my same age, probably right about 36, 37, right? Mid-30s probably, right? Yeah, we all know that the CPI numbers is garbage. Now, the question is, why are the books being cooked? How about the fact that you have, I don't know, millions of people retiring every month who are going to be relying on Social Security, and the Social Security and Medicaid are tied to CPI. All right. And when you have the federal budget, right, there's two separate parts of the federal budget. There's, and I mean, the Congress actually passes for spending and stuff that's mandatory. All right. And the mandatory spending are things like welfare, Social Security, and Medicare. So when the CPI goes up, we have to put more dollars into them. But these programs are bankrupt, completely and utterly bankrupt. And that's why they're doing this. See, this is the problem. Like, we have to have the whole conversation, my brother, all of it. You can't just have part of this conversation. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm not like trying to like crap on you about things. And I know that like telling the truth and bringing up these numbers and having conversations about the nuances of this is not popular, right? Because people go, oh, he wants to start talking about actual things that can be fixed. Oh, he wants to have a conversation. And I mean, you're going to upset the boomers and the women's and the single moms and all these things. We're going to, you know, and I know it's not popular, legitimately, but this is the truth, right? Like, back in the day when Social Security first got started, they had like 60 people for every one recipient. Today we're below 2. This is an issue, right? And there's not more people being born. Hence, you know what I mean, why like neither side of the aisle wants to stop immigration, because like, they don't have any kids being born. 19% of our children are aborted during pregnancy. So like, we can't have any of these conversations. And I mean, that's only part of the problem. You know, I mean, that's like, you know, on top of that, the divorce rate statistics, you know, child support and alimony and all the things that go with all this stuff, right? These are all huge parts of this problem that we're not having any type of conversation about. You know, and for you to just go, man, look, you know, it's just the Fed. The Fed is the problem. If we end the Fed, and I mean, all this stuff gets solved. Like, well, I'm going to agree with you. You right. And I mean, but like, like, I hope you understand it's going to collapse everything. Not just the government. The whole market will collapse. All right. And the reason why is like, you know why the Fed's printing money right now? Because baby boomers are pulling out their 401ks. They're growing from equity into bonds. All right. And they're moving out of equities and bonds and putting into like deposits and things of this nature. So the liquid assets that have been in the system pumping things up, which is why all these companies have been borrowing money. And I mean, to be able to pump up their stock price because they knew this was coming. Again, conversations you're not having. Conversations, we're not talking about. And I think it's important that we talk about these things. Like whether you agree with it, you don't agree with it, whatever the case might be. But we're going to keep going on this video.
Or anything that is actually required for life, so they're not honest people. Nevertheless, even on those official statistics, we're still running above 2%. The Fed typically, they like inflation to run around 2%, but this time they were saying they are willing to allow inflation to run much hotter than that. Now, every recession since 1913, any kind of economic setback, even what happened in 1929, even Ben Bernanke came out and admitted this in a meeting, that it is the Federal Reserve that has caused all of these events. And so the problem they had in 1929, there was a stock market crash. And in response, somewhere along the line, the idea goes forward around 1933 that all citizens must turn over their gold to a Federal Reserve Bank and to remove.
Okay, so this is Keynesian economics, all right? Again, can we have an actual conversation? Please, for the love of God, can we talk about the reasons behind stuff? All right, Ben Bernanke said, the Fed has caused, most of the recessions that have happened, right? But they didn't cause the crashes, right? The reason for the crash in 1929 is the massive amounts of United States citizens had, for the first time ever, been involved in the stock market, and there was a giant bull run, all right? And when this happened, especially after World War II, when we're standing here, we had just won and all this, life was pretty good, right? We ended up having a stock market collapse. It was actually just a correction, right? Because there were just too many people in the market, and the market was too hot. And yes, the Fed was printing out entirely too many dollars, right? People were asking for stocks, people were borrowing money, they were getting out loans, that they probably shouldn't have had. And they stood here and, they pumped up the stock market to a level that it had never seen before, and then it collapsed, right? And you see this guy right here, right? This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. All right. And he's signing this order that everybody turn in their gold bullion and certificates. Right. This is because FDR needed the money to pay for his programs. It had nothing to do with the Fed robbing you. That was not the situation at all. That had nothing to do with anything at all when it really came down to it. And look, nobody actually obeyed this order. Other than the institutions that legally had to, all right, the banks turned in their gold because they had to, because people knew they had it, right? Because the banks held on to it, and the people, they started snatching it from people and individuals. That would have been riots, right? Civil unrest. The banks turned it into the Fed too. This is how this operated. So you'll understand, all this is, you're looking at it from the wrong way. All right, legitimately, the government is the Fed is the government. The government can't do any, the Fed literally prints our money, all right? And it prints our money, and it borrows money to print our money, all right? And they needed the gold to be able to borrow because the United States didn't want to be able to tax people the way it needed to tax them. That's the reality. And even at this point right here, I'm this was the point when, I think taxes went up to 90% or something like that for the top 1% of earners. This is, patently ridiculous. I just, you have to look at the whole picture. Legit. It's don't chalk up to malice, which you can which you can dismiss as incompetence. It's important, that you separate the two.
Move the dollar's attachment to a fixed weight of gold. It really just put it out there. Now they call this freely floating fiat currencies, meaning it's whatever it is from day to day. These things are traded like.
Okay, so let's address this too. Jesus Christ. All right. Bretton Woods Agreement was signed in 1946, I do believe, in Connecticut, or 1944 in Connecticut. Basically said the United States currency would be, maintained at $35 per ounce. All right. That was per ounce of gold. That was the situation. Any country could trade in their dollars for gold because private citizens weren't allowed to hold it at that point because of FDR and the nonsense. Now, with that being said, when they stood here and left the Bretton Woods Agreement back in 1971, due to the fact that France, West Germany, and Switzerland all called in their gold reserves, right? Because they needed them for their stuff, right? And when this ended up happening, it ended up, causing what was known as, the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And then the rest of the world moved into a part of basically a freely floating, freely floating fiat currencies. But before that, in between 1944 and 1971, all the currencies in the world, for the most part, were attached to the U.S. dollar, right? So they moved with the U.S. dollars. And it's still pretty much that way today when it really comes down to it. And the U.S. dollar in 1973 went from, the Bretton Woods Agreement into what's known as the petrodollar agreement, where Richard Nixon went over to Saudi Arabia and agreed with Saudi Arabia that, hey, look, we use our military to be able to keep you guys in power, in the local region, whatever the case might be, as long as you, make sure you only trade your oil in dollars. And this is why we have the wars all over the Middle East and why we're using our military in the manner in which we're using it right now. Again, can we please have the whole conversation? Like, please. You know what I'm saying? Because, this is what actually maintains our currency right now. It's the fact that the whole world, and a lot of people still use the Bretton Woods Agreement for the most part. A lot of overseas trading and overseas pensions and overseas funding is still held in U.S. dollars. That's why Deutsche Bank's in such problems. They ended up, what they'll do is they'll buy, they'll run on margins with giant bets against the dollar or bets for the dollar, whatever the case might be, right? And when they do so, they lose a lot of times, right? They lose 50% of the time. They ended up being something like $70 trillion in debt, that they didn't have. And so now there's a giant $70 trillion derivative hole in, Deutsche Bank. It all came out here recently. It might have been 40 trillion. I don't remember the exact number, to be perfectly honest with you. But the rest of the world does the same thing. If they're going to stand here and have Saudi Arabia or Uzbekistan do a trade with Turkey or whatever, they'll stand here and they'll use the US dollar. They'll just convert both their currencies to the US dollar in order to, move stuff around, because it's much easier than doing the currency conversion between the two countries, which might move day to day. Depending on, oil reserves and how things are going. And due to the fact that the U.S. currency has remained stable because of the fact that the world needs oil and it only buys it in our currency. This is something that I think that we should be having a conversation about rather than sitting here looking at it in the manner in which we are at the moment. All right. So, let's keep going with this video.
Stocks on a market. And right now, the dollar has been the number one stock because all of the other stocks were crashing, if you look at it that way, in the FX market. So it has had an amazing rally. The dollar has been performing very, very well. Yet at the same time, gold has been having some strong performance as well. Typically, these are competing currencies. That's actually why there are laws in these states that actually tax you for purchases of.
Okay, look, gold is not a currency. Gold is money, all right? Gold is money. It's a store of value. It is legally money. That's, by definition, it's money, all right? It's not a currency. It's money. just want to put that out there real quick.
Precious metals, when gold and silver is money, actually, it's the only legal money that there is. Nevertheless, what I was saying earlier was that the greatest problem we face is the ignorance of this institution. That the fact that they are a private bank that is controlling our money supply. How can we expect things to go well? And an institution who even admits that they are the ones who causes every recession. And in response to the recession, what do they gain? So that's what you also need to ask, because this is where it comes through, because they've enriched themselves enormously. If they were doing it just for fun or for something to do, that would be bad enough. But no, they've actually made themselves enormously wealthy. A new thing that the Fed has started to do recently, and you're going to love this one. Previously, they're actually paying out the banks interest for holding their money.
All right, it's what's known as negative interest rates. All right, all over the world, they're doing the same thing. Basically, they're just trying to pump cash into the system any way they can right now, because cash is moving out of the system because, again, the baby boomers and the pension funds are pooling their money because they're all retiring. All right. And Anybody knows you stand here and if you're holding the money in equities, which is stocks, okay, and you sell enough stocks, what happens to that stock? It ends up collapsing. So, if you let the system go as it is right now, the system will collapse and it'll show to be just a Ponzi scheme that it is. The first ones in made all the money and the last ones out get nothing. But they want to try and make sure that they run this Ponzi scheme as long as possible so that the baby boomers can all retire and die off. And then we'll deal with, building something new on the other side. Because the truth of the matter is that the entire world, not just Western civilization, right? Not just, like Europe and America. Everybody, Mexico, most of South America, China, India, bunch of countries in Africa, the Middle East are all below replacement values or below replacement for the amount of kids that they're having. All right. And when you have a shrinking amount of people, coming in, you don't have taxpayers tomorrow to be able to foot these bills, to be able to pay for the social programs like Social Security and Medicaid and, universal health care, whatever it is. And all, especially here, not just here, but in other countries as well. All right. So understand something. They're just trying to kick the Ponzi scheme down the road. It's not about enriching themselves. Like, of course, they're getting paid. Like, as I told you, do you want this to be run by the government? Do you really want this to be like a fully government enterprise? Because if it is a fully government enterprise, it's going to be run by government employees and it's going to be just destroyed inside of like a year. All right. Because you see what's going on. We'll end up wiping our butts with $20 bills here in a minute. That's why most of these central banks, the IMF, all these things are ran by other bankers. All right. And they're paid like bankers. It has to be that way. Because you want these individuals to make as much money because that way they make you as much money as possible. Because they all live on margin. That's just how it operates. It's not evil. It's just human nature, all right? You're going to go into capitalism spiel here in a second and stand here and go into the market spiel in a second. And the reason why it works is because people profit off of what they're successful and good at. And that's the best part of this, is that every man has the opportunity to make as much money as he possibly can and go into the market and do what he can do. It's that simple, man. Like, yo, be easy on this shit, man. Real shit.
Paying them interest on their excess reserves. So they're not paying the Treasury as much as they usually do, because every time when they make a profit, on a year, they're supposed to give over those profits to the Treasury. But they've been giving less. Why is that? Because they had a lot more expenses. A lot of those expenses were paying out these banks. So the Federal Reserve is a bank made up of, it's really shadowy trying to figure out just the exact banks, but it's somewhere around 11 different banks. All of them. Some of them actually are from the United States now. So they make up this institution. Therefore, whenever we have recessions, they then get permission to unlimited amounts of currency creation to which they can hand it out to anyone they want. They give it to themselves. They are the banks. Behind what is called the Federal Reserve is individual banks, and they're pay themselves. So we got a problem, right? And
again, what I'm saying? Like, yes, and they do buy bonds they buy their own bonds. Like, yo, why do companies buy their own bonds? Yeah, to pump up their own value. Like, just to create money. Because that's their job, is to create money. Legitimately. Like, that's their job. It's nothing more, nothing less, man. Like, you have to understand that, like, these are all operations, again, just trying to keep this Ponzi scheme afloat. Because, like, yo, we made a bunch of promises we couldn't keep. And let me be honest here. We let a lot of people vote who ought not to be voting. When it really comes down to it. Because then you got to tell them that you have to take away their free gibs, and they won't do that. Like, that's really a much, much bigger problem when it comes down to it. So what do we do? You know what I mean? Like, yo, the Fed is not the problem. I mean, the Fed's like a mass shooter's gun. Like, yo, okay, take the gun away. He's still going to find a knife. Or he'll go steal another gun. They'll make another one. Like, yo, the problem's the government when it really comes down to it. Like, that's really what it is. The problem is the government giving away too much free stuff and promising free things that they couldn't continue on. These banks made bets, all right? And these companies made bets, and these hedge funds made bets, and the American consumer made bets, all right? On like things like 401ks, for instance, which are insured by the FDIC up to a certain point. There's a lot of people out here with $1 million 401ks. They're not all insured. Like 100,000 of us insured. Think about it like this. If you're used to living at $40,000 a year, right? And you own a home and you pay property taxes. Who's going to pay that money after 150,000 is gone? That's 4 years, not even. Right? And then you're out of money. You can't afford your house no more. And all of a sudden, all these houses go down onto the market. Right? And all of a sudden, there's no more property taxes. So that means the schools ain't getting paid for. Your fire department ain't getting paid for. The ambulances ain't getting paid for. Streets, roads, bridges, water supplies. It's a complicated problem. Legit. Like, this is, again, man, they're trying to keep this Ponzi scheme going. Infinite growth requires infinite resources and infinite people. We don't have either one of those. You know, this is capitalism and communism, socialism. None of these are going to work anymore. It's got to come up with something new. I personally think the government needs to get out of the way and get rid of all their taxes. That's my solution to all this. Let people do what they need to do and survive and build back up again. And make this a cyclical thing. Close down the borders. I think it'd be much better for everybody, because at least then the values of things would drop, because there's going to be less people vying for them. And then you'll be able to survive better. And then you end up, after a while, you end up having more kids, and then the cycle continues. And it could be a cycle that we can get used to, and we can deal with, and we can live with, and we can survive on and understand what we're going to be doing and make new rules for this. Because we went from 2 billion people in the year 1900 to 7.5 billion people on this earth right now. Something we're not discussing again. And it's an aging population. All those people that were born after World War II are all dying and getting old right now. We got to have this conversation.
The reason we need to bring this up is because a lot of people, right now especially, because of the timing, what the year it is, and ultimately, people, they want to blame inequality, wealth inequality, on the free market. Saying that it's just because this is what happens. It just creates billionaires, and billionaires are, of course, bad for everyone. And these are not honest people. This is not the source of your problems. And it's so sad, because we see the younger generations and the larger generation than Generation X coming up. And their viewpoint is that the problems that they have faced, the setbacks they have faced in the economy, are due to the free market. This is not a good thing at all. And the reason, because this always happens in times of economic distress, because they tell us it was a recovery. But in times of economic distress, these kinds of ideals begin to be pushed forward, because it's the best way. The best way when people are discontent and they wonder, why is life harder for me? Why do I make less than my parents? Why do I make less than I did before? Why is my paycheck not going as far? And then someone steps up to a microphone and says, listen, this is the reason why. It's because Amazon exists. It's because Walmart exists. Listen to this. I mean, honestly, we all jump and say, yeah, you're right. Why is that? Because there's many more poor than there are rich. And many just jump at the idea, hey, let's divvy up what they've made.
All right, so let's address this, as a whole right now. All right, this has more to do with social spending and the growth of population since the 1990s. All right, in the year 1990, there was like 230 million people in the United States, and right now there's 330 million people. And in having that many individuals, added, and having this much social spending added, when it really comes down to it, when the mental gets down to when the numbers really start breaking down, that's why these people aren't doing as well as their parents. That's why we have this massive amount of inflation. And yes, it has to do with the Federal Reserve, but it's not. The Federal Reserve, again, is just a gun. It's just a tool. It's just a hose, right? It really isn't the actual problem. You're not addressing the fucking root of the problem. You're just, you're cutting off, the top of the weed and leaving the roots in the ground. That's the issue. You're pulling the tick out of your leg and their head's still in there. That's the reality of where we are right now. All right. Because when it really comes down to it, again, we don't want to address social spending. We don't want to address how we're borrowing against our children's future. And then knowing that we don't have any children being born. And then bringing in more people and hoping to grow the population so we can have more tax receipts. And it just continues on this cycle. Where you have more people, you need more currency, there's more bills in circulation, there's more individuals, there's more, the housing costs more, the price of wages goes down because the need for labor goes down. This is all part of the market. This is a design flaw. When you have a central bank printing money and when you have social spending that we're not paying for when it really comes down to it.
But you need to consider it takes away the engine of prosperity then. What has made America so great of a nation is the fact that we have had this engine of production. People, when you can achieve more, when you can be paid more, when there's competition. Competition helps in so many ways to keep prices low. When there's only one distributor of goods and services, those goods and services cost a fortune. Either that or they dry up. See, this is the problem. Because the free market, it also pushes out bad players. It's quite possibly the most brilliant economic system ever known to man. And it has created enormous amounts of prosperity in this nation. The great nation that you see that used to exist here, very large, very prosperous, it's still prosperous. It comes from capitalism. The ways in which we have failed are in the ways that we have relinquished some of the freedom in the markets. The ways that we have gone wrong because we don't really have that, do we? We have Federal Reservism. There can't be a central bank in a free market because essentially their purpose is to control the markets at will.
Okay, here's the thing. All right, you're not addressing government spending. All right, I don't know why you're not addressing government spending. I don't understand why you're not addressing government spending. All right, state, local, and federal. All right, taxes, spending for 2020. Okay, legitimately, is $9 trillion. We make $18 trillion on the GDP. That is 50%. 50 cents on every dollar goes to spending on the fucking government. Please address the real problem. Real shit. Because we only take in $4 trillion in taxes. It means there's $5 trillion that we're not paying for. Where do you think that money comes from? Who do you think prints it? I agree with you. The Fed, is an issue, right? Like, see, that's where the Fed is the problem. That's the real problem with the Fed. Okay, that's the issue, is that it's funding this garbage. All right, legitimately. But it's not that it's giving money to the banks. That's not the problem. Then that $9 trillion, that's not money spent on the banks. It's 1.5 trillion. You know what I'm saying? It's like 1.5 trillion on what is it? Yeah, 1.5 trillion on Social Security and pensions, right? 1.8 trillion on Medicare and local insurances for your state and local governments. Another 1.3 trillion. $1.3 trillion on education. Mostly spent at the local level. Right? Yeah, all that shit down there. Right, yeah. Another $1 trillion spent on our military. Another $1 trillion spent for welfare. And $500 billion of that comes out of the pockets of fathers paying child support. Why are we not as prosperous? Can we have that conversation, sir? By chance, can we please have that conversation, sir? Like, I think we're having the wrong conversation, sir. Like, for the love of God, can we have the right conversation?
And ultimately, I do believe they are losing control of this. And in the end, we should turn to a gold standard, with or without them. Because what stops us?
I'm with your ideology, buddy. Like, yo, the people are the answer. The people are absolutely the answer. Legitimately. If you want things solved, we're going to have to do it ourselves. But we have to get the government out of the way. Because all they're just going to do is they're just going to tax us to death and destroy it anyway. All right? Or they're going to stand here and hand out free money and end up destroying it anyway. This is the problem. This is why you're not doing as well as your parents. All right? Because things cost twice as much. Why do they cost twice and 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 times, depending on what you're talking about, you know, education and all that stuff? Don't go to college, by the way. Please don't go to college. It's a stupid thing you can do. Believe me. Yo, I make $100,000 a year. You know what I'm saying? I got a GED. I dropped out of high school. Like, yo, dude, there's better ways to make money. Believe me. It's not that difficult. All right? Yo, look, seriously. Again, you know what I mean? Like, real shit. Like, let's have a real conversation about this. Like, this is, you know what I mean? Blaming the Fed is nonsense. The Fed's not the problem. You know what I mean? People are the solution, but like we have to get the government and states and local governments out of the way. Like some of these taxes have to disappear. We have to destroy the education system in America and probably rebuild it from ground up. You know what I mean? Women need to go back into the kitchens where they belong. Like, you know, there's so much stuff. You know what I mean? Like, yo, when you end up eliminating half of the labor force, the wages are going to go through the roof. You know what I mean? The need for housing is going to half. Like, yo, again, there's ways to solve this problem, but we're not talking about any of them because it offends somebody. Let's talk about it.
All it takes is enough of the people to wake up. I would accept gold and silver for payment. I would prefer gold and silver for payment. I think we're coming up on a nice run here. It's been looking exciting. Even at a time when the dollar has performed exceptionally well, gold, it climbed almost 20% in 2019. The stock markets were at all-time highs. Those headlines graced, you know, the papers how many times? Honestly. Nevertheless, even the fact that we use a fiat currency and have a central bank, this is not representative of a free market. And ultimately, that's the solution, to return to a free market. And the way we need to do this is to address this issue we have of the Federal Reserve. Any institution that would name itself the Federal Reserve in advance, and keep in mind, this was not the first attempt. There was the first National Bank of the United States. The same group of people, mind you, behind the same doors, the same money, the same banks. And they set up a bank. And Thomas Jefferson, he dissolved that bank.
Yeah, that's why Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton, all right, was over the central bank. But there was like 3 or 4 of them. There was like 3 or 4 of them. There was one right after the Civil War. There was one we first got formed, and then there was one in the 1820s. Like, yeah, it's like there was like 3 or 4 of them, right? This is just the longest running one, all right. And I'm well aware of this quote, and I understand where you are. Like, I don't like fiat currencies as much as the next guy does. I also don't like Keynesian economics. I think it's borderline ridiculous. Just like I don't like modern monetary theory. I think it's all just grand glorious math. There's a bunch of circle jerks, you know what I mean, from an economist, you know. And I've addressed this again on my channel, you know what I mean. Like, yo, just saying, real conversation, buddy, real conversation.
And he said, if the people of this nation ever allow the matter of their money to be decided by private banks, the institutions that'll rise up around them will leave them penniless on the land that their forefathers conquered. Don't you listen to what he's saying? That is what has happened to us. That is why you are experiencing a different life than your parents, and they are experiencing a different life than their parents.
Yeah, I appreciate the passion. I do, and I get it. Legit, I do. I completely understand it. You know what I mean? And I've said the same thing. I have. You know what I mean? I've quoted the same person. I've quoted Jefferson 1,000 times. You know what I mean? Like, but let's be honest about where we are. You know what I mean? We've stood here and we've traded our, liberty for security. You know what I mean? And we're receiving neither liberty nor security at this point. Like, we literally have a surveillance state, and a police state at this point. So let's not, like, yo, I got you. Jefferson was a genius. I'm breaking down Niccolo Machiavelli's Art of War. Yes, he wrote Art of War, right? Not he didn't just do the Prince. He also did the discourses on Levy, which I'm gonna do next after I'm done with this. This is a long-term project for me, but you'll need to check it out. It has a lot of things in the Prince as well. Like, you understand, like Jefferson based a lot of America's model, on a lot of its constitution and its governmental model off of what Machiavelli said. It's the reason why we have arms. He said the people will fight for a backyard quicker than they'll fight for any prince. So, do not disarm them. That's what Machiavelli said. Yo, this is where we are in America. Like, I think it's important, that we know, our history, and we know what we're talking about. Like, I got you. Like, I completely understand what you're saying. And I think it's patently terrible, and I think it's awful. Like, I have children, I got babies just like you do, sir. I actually have 5 of them, and I love them all to death. And I hate the fact that we're indebting them, to pay for us today. I think that's horrible too. I don't like that ideology at all. And I don't like the fact that I'm indebting my grandkids, that I don't even have yet for things that they're paying for today. Like, so, as again, like, yo, let's have what conversation really needs to be had.
This system, it won't continue forever. Ultimately, all fiat currencies come to an end. Having a central bank, why do we need that? A great country like the United States of America, why do we need a central bank to deal with the issue of the people's money? Why do we need a private bank made up of about 11 or 12 of the largest banks in the world to decide the creation of our money, the value of our money? They're printing money like crazy right now, if you haven't been paying attention. So the solution is to free the markets from this entity. And ultimately, that would restore it so it could be a properly functioning system. The inequality that is present, meaning the stock returns that have been generated that have not benefited the populace equally. Because along with those rising asset prices, other things rise in price as well. Look at inflation kicking.
Yeah, like, yo, you want to see something really crazy? Look at like M4, M5, and M6. Like, yo, because like, yo, M1 and M2 is just money inside of the nation. Like, yo, you want to see something really insane? Look at M4, M5, and M6. Like, yo, just woof. Yo, they're really, really bad. Legit.
Yeah. So for the people, their wages are not growing. They're not growing because all of that effort has been focused on propping up the stock market. Do you own stocks? Maybe you do. Not the way.
Yes, you do. You own more stocks than any other entity in America. All right. This is something else I wanted to address. The vast majority of our stock market is made up of 401k funds. All right. It's all retirement funds. That's why it's a problem. Legit. Like, the exposure that this market has, the equity market has to these 401ks are ridiculous. All right. The 401ks, the 501cs, all these things, man. Like, yo, they're man, listen, all right? Like, yo, Americans own a buttload of stocks, okay? A buttload of stocks. Like, this is the retirement plan. Like, yes, you own stocks. This guy owns stocks. I own stocks. Everybody who has a job who has a 401k owns stocks, all right? Yo, that 401k is invested in the stock market. That's where the money comes from. Like, yo, Jesus Christ. Dude, look, all right? Like, seriously. Let's keep going.
The way that some of these people own stocks, not the way that some of these people own stocks. Some of these people have seen their great fortunes, these millionaires and billionaires, nearly double. None of us are even close to that stage, even if you day trade or even dabble here or there. Honestly.
Look. There's so many millionaires right now in America are millionaires because of their 401ks. Legitimately. Like, it's It's a crazy amount. Like, they just had an article about it the other day. Like, I seen an article, I know the other day, it was a couple weeks ago. But, like, I just seen an article about it. Legit, there's a lot of people, all right, who own $1 million in their 401ks. And they're not rich, okay? They're legitimately not rich. Like, you really break it down, that's $50,000 a year for 20 years. All right, and you retire at 60, that means you're going to make it to 82. And that depends on how much money you spend a year. Plus, on top of that, how much your medical expenses are going to be. It's not that much money. It's really not. Like, yo, the billionaires, like, yes. And there's not even that many. Like, yo, I looked it up the other day. There's not even one person in America who earned $1 billion. There's 72 people in all of America who made more than $50 million in 1 year last year. These are important things to understand. All right. Stop being jealous of other people. Okay. You should want other people to be successful. All right. That's the point of capitalism. They should inspire you to be great. They should inspire you to work hard and be successful. Don't be jealous of them. Oh, Jesus Christ.
The system is their system. And they've benefited their own selves, their own players. You look at how JP Morgan and Chase had record profits, and they're no doubt closely interconnected and affiliated with this bank. No doubt they have dinner parties together, Jerome Powell and Jamie Dimon. Make no mistake. I mean, JP Morgan, the original JP Morgan, said it best. Gold is money. Everything else is debt. Once you understand this, you will never be poor again. I thank you guys for stopping by. Subscribe to the channel. As always, stay safe.
Okay, so he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Like, yo, assets are assets, buddy. Everything else is debt. You know what I'm saying? Like, when it comes down to it, like, there's a big difference between assets and debt. You know, like, that's some reality for you. You know, and the money printing is something that should be ceased. But then again, you know, I mean, hey, look, do you want to collapse? How many millions of people are you willing to watch die? Are you willing to watch your grandma and grandpa die? That's the question. You know what I mean? Like, that's really the question. I know it's a trade-off. You know what I mean? And so it needs a nuanced discussion, not this rhetoric. You know what I mean? Because this rhetoric is dangerous when it really comes down to it. Like, but yo, look, man, I'm Tom Pease from Pnoid News. Y'all like this? You know, hit the sub button. Y'all know the deal, man. Support the channel. Yo, I'm gonna holler at y'all later. Peace be like one, man. Later.